This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's edition of Ingles on the Beat. And really pleased tonight to bring on AJC's Chip Towers, fellow Georgia beat writer. And I thought Chip would be the perfect guest, as I think he's covered about half of these Georgia Tech games, at least those going back to the 1980s. Chip, thanks for joining me tonight. What was your first Georgia Tech game?
You know, I was afraid you might ask me that. And my actual first Georgia Tech game was the old Bull Pups versus the Baby Jackets game for what was the I'm trying to think of what the charity was, Eggleston Children's Hospital. And that's when the junior varsity teams used to play on Thanksgiving Day. Now, I believe that was 1984 when I was a student at the University of Georgia and working for the Red and Black. And I may or may not be correct about that. But my first, really memory and I didn't actually cover the game because I wasn't, I wasn't on the football coverage team at that time, was that same year, 1984. And if I've got this right, and I don't know if this is a live commentary situation. Yeah, I think it is. So I know I'll get corrected if I have this wrong. But I think that was the game that John Dewberry came to Athens with Georgia Tech. He had played for Georgia, transferred to Georgia Tech long before the transfer portal, and led them to a 35-18 win in Sanford Stadium. And that was the first time I ever witnessed a visiting team tearing the hedges out. There's a famous picture ran on the cover of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution of John Dewberry with a big long twig in his mouth. And that, of course, had come after a long period of frustration, such as Tech is in right now against Georgia. They obviously dominated them in the early 80s when they were winning 3 straight SEC championships. Kind of from then to 2000, it was kind of back and forth. Georgia always won more than it lost, but Tech was, Georgia went into the Tech game with a considerable trepidation every year. That's not the case in present day.
No, it wouldn't seem to be. The Bulldogs are a 35-point favorite in this week's game, noon. I'm sure there'll be some people watching. Chip, tonight they had the practice, and Kirby had given us a practice report earlier in the day, so there wasn't going to be any surprises. Did see Kendall Milton out there with a big brace on his leg. I know Kirby said he targeted coming back from this game. I don't see it. I'd be surprised if he's back before the college football playoff games when a guy's wearing a brace that big. I was encouraged to see Dominic Blaylock out there just going through reps like everyone else, and we saw Dom come back that last game. Nolan Smith was out there with a brace on his elbow. Will he practice? Won't he practice? I don't know. That's a tough one. Jamari Salyer was out there. Do you give him run? You've given him 3 weeks off that foot. Maybe he gets a little bit of work. So on the injury front, Pickens out there looking as good as anybody, but wearing a black jersey. Really no real breaking news, Chip. And I guess if you're Kirby Smart, I've got to think you play this game differently than you played the last one. I know senior day was fun and Jordan Davis carried the ball for a touchdown. But if we're being honest about this, I don't know that Georgia got better in that game. And that's something that Kirby always talks about, is getting better every game. He didn't like practices. And from what I saw in the game, Chip, other than a couple of runs from Zamir and Cook, I didn't think Georgia looked real sharp.
Yeah, it's hard to take a whole lot at all out of that Charleston Southern game. And, this isn't what you asked me about. But, I really, as much as coaches and Kirby Smart in particular like to help out, the lower division teams, it's just that, that's about run its course of being a possibility to do. And you see the perfect reason right there. Actually, I thought Georgia's crowd was pretty good. It was a cold day, cold and windy. There was a lot of reason not to go, but I do think the first Georgia being number one in the nation this year, but this having an exceptional senior class, I think that brought a lot of people out. But the usefulness of a game like it is good to be able to rest. And Georgia's schedule, you and I have talked about this, I know off air, it's really been one of the magical things about this whole season is just how perfect the schedule ended up being set up. I mean, you're playing Charleston Southern in a weaker than usual Georgia Tech team at the same time that Alabama, your competitor, is grinding out against Arkansas and Auburn next week. I mean, that takes a toll. I don't care what you say. So I think it was good from the standpoint that Georgia rested. But you're right. The way Kirby sells it, on an everyday basis about everything's about getting better, he deviated from that a little bit this past Saturday. And I thought an example he referred to today, this was not why he was referring to it, but he was talking about Brock Vandagriff, how the quarterbacks looked. And he said, well, he couldn't really draw anything from Brock Vandagriff because they were putting a bunch of different people in the game, a bunch of different linemen that they wanted to get to play. And, Brock Vandagriff, he needs work because, I don't know how the whole quarterback thing's going to shake out. Nobody does. And it's fascinating and it's going to be really cool to see how it works out. But at the end of the day, these guys need whatever live work they can possibly get. And there wasn't much meaningful to be had in that game. Now, back to your point, yeah, this game will be handled completely different. You can start with, I don't know how many Georgia ended up dressing for that game. I know they played 90 players, possibly over 90, which is just unheard of. That's really hard to do. They travel 70 in SEC game. They'll probably travel more than that. But, when you're talking about buying hotel rooms and doing, dressing everybody out and everything, that the logistics that comes with playing a game, even just as far away as I think you'll have far fewer players. But I do think that if Georgia gets the opportunity to get a lead, I don't think it's a beauty contest anymore from let's keep the starters in there all the way through the fourth quarter so that we can get 2 more meaningless touchdowns in a 40-point game so that we look good for the selection committee. I think that's over. I think because of the game you have the next week where rest can be had, you're going to take it. And that goes back to the injury situation too. I'm not sure whether they have to have Jamari Sawyer or some of the other guys that we're talking about, certainly not Kendall Milton. So I think, you err on the side of caution in those scenarios, and that's what's helped Georgia navigate this entire season.
Yeah, Chip, I read Mark Bradley's column today about Kirby Smart having it covered, and I think we've all kind of looked at it like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and if Stetson Bennett's winning, don't change anything up. And I was pretty on board with that until last Saturday when I noticed JT fired that pass out to Adonai Mitchell and it hit him in the shoulder pad like he wasn't used to the ball getting there that fast, and he hit one to the Braxton Hick guy in the hands, and then the number 23 guy, Jalen Johnson, wasn't able to catch up to a deep ball. And I said, that timing is just a little bit off, and I'm just not sure that you can expect JT, if you needed to go to him, to just come in and be ready if you're going to try this bullpen scenario versus a rotation. Earlier in the year, we saw Stetson rotate in on the third series against South Carolina. Now we're seeing more of a bullpen. I guess I'm just not sure. And maybe this is all a moot point. Maybe Stetson and the offense is going to go out there and just run it down Alabama's throat, lead the whole game, and you won't need to make any quarterback changes. Everybody will be happy because the Dogs are winning. But this idea that there's a plan B, that you can just pull JT in, throw him in the game, and everything's just going to clickety-click, I'm not sure about that after that last Saturday game. And granted, it was just one game. What are your thoughts on the bullpen? I guess is the way I'm using it, like a bullpen rotation or using JT as a bullpen or a number 2 option. Well,
the way they're doing it right now, it makes a statement that clearly he's number 2. Mm-hmm. And I thought for sure in this game, I think you and I, we always talk before the games. We're at the same places and we always talk about these things. And I would have been pretty. It's another reason I don't gamble. I mean, I would have bet money that there would have been more of a rotation to get JT more reps in a regular offensive scenario. In other words, you're not worried about trying to run up a lead on anybody, and you're running your regular offense at a regular rate early. And I think you and I were talking about maybe 2 for Stetson, 1 for JT, 2 for Stetson, 1 for JT. I guess that dog isn't hunting anymore. I don't know. But you talking about right there, it's the first time I thought about it. But I think I'm going to dig into this before we get to the Alabama kickoff sometime, is researching how Alabama distributed snaps between Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa during that stretch, because obviously that in both games they played Georgia, a quarterback changeup was paramount to the outcome. And, I think that's what Kirby's thinking ultimately. I think ultimately Georgia has not been threatened since the Clemson game. And JT's situation, oblique, latissimus dorsi, both of those things, you didn't need to rush him back because, you kind of had everything well in hand. Now, you couldn't have known that, but that certainly turned out to be the case. And, maybe you're just at the point where Kirby just doesn't want to mess with a good thing. It's like, well, it's working this way. Let's just keep going this way until it doesn't work. Now, you're right. Look, he's getting those reps in practice. Let's not kid ourselves. Georgia 2 spots, everything. So except for when it comes to 11-on-11 scrimmage, because obviously you can only have one person under center. But when they're working with those receivers every day, talking about timing, whether it be Jalen Johnson or Brock Bowers, they're throwing to him every day, both of them, same routes every day. And so that's going on for sure. So there's no excuse for your timing to be off in a game. It's his job to be ready when he's put in there, regardless of when that is, right? That's ultimately what the charge is to JT Daniels, just like it was to Stetson Bennett before, or Carson Beck or Brock Vandagriff. You got to be ready to go regardless of the circumstances. Now, we can argue till the cows come home about whether it's being handled correctly, but the bottom line is this is the way Kirby is handling it, and only time will tell whether it's going to serve the team as well as it has. But not much to argue with right now. Number 1, undefeated, average margin of victory, 31 plus points or whatever it is.
Yeah, they're winning a lot of ball games, Chip. They sure are. And like I said, maybe there is no need for a plan B. Georgia can just dominate the whole postseason, never fall behind by 1 score, and stop the Alabama Crimson Tide on offense. They were able to adjust against Tennessee after trailing in the first quarter. They didn't give up another touchdown until the fourth quarter. I will say this about the defense. I had a bit of a concern today when Christopher Smith still wasn't practicing. And this is an injury that, to me, I don't want to say the straw that broke the camel's back, but we've known this secondary has been thin all year, whether it was Jalen Kimber, one of your starting corners, going down, which pressed Keeley into action, whether it was Tyke Smith never making that return. We'd all been waiting for the West Virginia All-American, keeping Latavius Brini on the field. Today Kirby was talking about having confidence in William Poole. No offense to William Poole, but I don't think there's anybody left on the bench. I think we're at the bottom of the bucket there. It's safety when you hit a 4th or 5th year senior that I don't know if we've seen him play all year, and you're getting ready to play Alabama. It's not like you're getting ready to play Arkansas or Kentucky or Missouri. You're getting ready to play a team that has 2 of the most dynamic receivers and one of the most prolific pass games in college football at a time when your secondary is really running on fumes from a depth standpoint, Chip. Yeah. I don't know if you're as concerned about it as I am, but because that front seven's so doggone good, maybe it'll be a moot point. But I just kind of look at the timing of this and I think to myself, I don't know if Georgia can be as patient on offense as they have.
Yeah, well, I know what you mean. You're tying it into offense. My point on that, I still think, just going back to the quarterbacks for just a second, I do think, like I said, I want to go back and compare this to Jalen and Tua. But I do think ultimately Kirby is wanting to go into the SEC championship game and the college football playoff, because I think they're both going to happen regardless of what comes out of this game, unless something really wonky happens. But I think, just based on the Alabama model, and Kirby's all about that Alabama model, having two distinctly different quarterbacks ready at your disposal is a great thing to have. And I think, they're ready to unleash each to his strengths against anybody. And, that'll start against Alabama. Now, back to your point, I'm not personally very concerned about it, but I guarantee you Georgia is very concerned about that secondary. And you think about it, this was the biggest question mark coming into the season. O-line was a question, receivers were a question. Those have been answered and answered well. We can argue about to what degree. And secondary has been wonderful, but, how much does that have to do with a front seven that, one of the best in college football history, or certainly in the 21st century? There's been great teams, and it's hard to get into this kind of argument. The bottom line, Georgia's front seven has protected that secondary. Now, we saw against Tennessee, when you go to the extremes and you got really big receivers and you can push them out there beyond the numbers and force one-on-one coverage, now you got a problem. And, Christopher Smith makes a huge difference. I think he's been just a great because this wasn't guaranteed. Christopher Smith was one of those guys that just hadn't played when Richard LeCounte went out. He was forced into action. Last year, he's responded very well. And I don't know what in the world this knee bruise thing that came up that had him on crutches, but it came out of the blue last Wednesday, and it's not good. And then add to that, I think Tyke Smith would have made a huge difference. First, he's hurt in the preseason. Then he has the season-ending ACL. The whole reason they brought him here, they love Latavius Brenny, but look at Latavius Brenny. He looks like a linebacker. He's a big, strong guy. He is not his forte, his strength is not in coverage. But Tyke Smith is, just like Tyreek Stevenson was when he subbed for Mark Webb in those coverage packages. And that's what you've kind of been struggling ever since that happened to find, is it William Poole? Is it moving Christopher Smith down there? Is it, who's the other guy? Bullard, Javon Bullard. They're trying a lot of different. Adam Anderson was playing some out there. He's not around anymore. And you already are at a depth, probably have a depth problem on your hands. So you're right. And, there's some really scary matchups in that Alabama game for sure. The more 1-on-1 that they force you into, the more jeopardy your defense is going to be put in.
Chip, I want to share a beat writer phenomenon that I think that you'll agree with me on. You and I have been in the business a long time together, different schools, working together here and there, off and on. We're at a point with Georgia football now where this program is so good. It's the number one team. It's unanimous consensus. Kirby has built an incredible program, and we spend our time critiquing it. When we're talking about greatness, when we're talking about perfection, we look for, oh my gosh, what could go wrong? Now, Chip, you and I have also covered some pretty terrible teams over the years. And I don't know about you, but I'd always look for all the good things to talk about. So when we're at this point now where we're critiquing a team, or when we're looking around the league at potential threats, it's because the rest of the league matters. It's because we got to keep an eye on Alabama or Ohio State, because Georgia is standing on this mountaintop. And I understand that, you understand it, but sometimes I see readers or callers or people, and they're like, oh, y'all just complain. It's like, no. Don't you understand? You have a team to root for now that is the best in the country, and it's about trying to stay king of the hill. And so the stories are about what could get you, what could take, because you're the best. Chip, we could sit here all night and go, yeah, well, Chip, James Cook's pretty good. And you go, yeah, Mike, and Brock Bowers is having a good season. Everybody go, yeah, we know all this. What we're trying to tell you is, what are the threats and what are the potential stories and what are the things that George is working on to play that perfect game that Kirby says is so elusive that they haven't played yet. We've talked about defense. I want to flip it over to offense now. And I want to ask you about a player because I'm really surprised. I wouldn't say this player has underachieved because I don't think he's been given an opportunity. But I really thought Darnell Washington was going to be a 25 or a 30 catch guy, Chip, and he's only getting targeted once a game. I'm a little concerned about that from the standpoint of this is a guy that wants to go to the NFL next year, and would he stick around if he thinks he's going to get 7 or 10 balls next year? Your thoughts on Darnell and why we haven't seen more of this 6'8", 280-pound force?
Well, I think with Darnell, it comes back almost the same thing as the Stetson JT conversation. And this is where, you can, opinion is divided on Kirby Smart, but he does live by the edict that, it's a production-based business. And so can Darnell Washington produce at a higher rate than Brock Bowers is right now? I don't know. Possibly.
Can't you have both?
Yeah. Well, not really. No, I don't think so. I think you can certainly play 2 tight ends, and Georgia does have 2 tight ends packages, and they do, H-back one of them and flex, and they do a lot of different things. But, we forget about this from the beginning of the year. One of the storylines we were talking about is, there's only one football, and where are you going to go with it? And that Georgia does, that's a good problem to have, but there's only so many, you can go with. So I think Darnell Washington is there, but, you can't do that necessarily at the jeopardy of fewer opportunities for Brock Bowers, because Brock Bowers has been there from the beginning, hasn't missed a practice, hasn't missed a meeting, hasn't been hurt. Actually, I think Kirby said it today. Somebody asked him, what has been the best thing about Brock Bowers or whatever that's kept? He said healthy. I mean, he just hadn't missed anything. There's a reward that goes for that. And it's not, so injuries, people handle them differently. Same thing happened with Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm. I mean, Jacob Eason never got a shot after he got healthy again. There was that argument, same argument that you have right now that, well, Jacob Eason at 6'6", 220 pounds, clearly he's got a better arm than Jake Fromm. Yeah, but Jake Fromm isn't losing. He didn't lose until he did finally. But, he wasn't the reason that they lost. And I think it's the same situation, man. This is what happens when you stack up 5 stars. You got to keep incentive. You have to incentivize staying healthy. Now, some of that is luck and stuff. It's also stretching. It's also getting your rehab work in. It's also, being able to show up to everything and being engaged, regardless of what your role is from week to week to week. So I think Darnell Washington is not getting enough touches, right? But how you get him more, I'm not 100% sure. The only way to do that is to have less opportunities for Brock Bowers, and I'm not sure he deserves that.
Or to throw more passes, and we know that Kirby's comfortable with the run-pass ratio that he has with the players.
That's a good point as well, right?
Chip, what are the 3 things, as we get ready for really the big game? I've called this the postseason preseason, these last 2 games. These are the preseason games for the postseason. And we saw how Kirby managed the Charleston Southern game, get everybody in, have a little bit of fun with Jordan Davis running the ball. This game, we both agree he'll manage differently, probably more closer to the vest. Maybe we see 2 quarterbacks instead of 4. But if you're Kirby Smart, what are the 3 things that you want to see in this game against Georgia Tech that will make you feel better about, and I'm not saying you feel bad about the Alabama matchup, but would give you better feelings about the Alabama matchup?
Well, I don't know if you're going to get a lot of that. Georgia Tech throws the ball fairly well, but, certainly not to any degree. I don't think there's any way they can emulate anything, and they're not going to try to, of course, but I don't think they'll emulate anything that Alabama does offensively, and that's a problem. But really what you're looking for, I think 2 things are going to happen in this game in particular. Georgia is going to look to play more efficiently than they have all year long. That means, penalties, missed assignments, special teams in particular. Special teams have been, special teams for Georgia have been interesting this year. They're not bad, but they've been a little shaky here and there, just not as crisp as you're used to seeing them, which is kind of a surprise with an All-American at punter. You should have great returners at Georgia. They've had one short punt return for a touchdown, but otherwise, nothing like you're used to seeing. So I think you're looking for that. Secondly, I also think this is going to be a fame game, if you will. In other words, Georgia is not going to show Alabama anything that they expect to do. They may even go, this may be Bizarro world. These may be the Bizarro Bulldogs. Like, we're going to do stuff we don't ever do. Or we're going to be so vanilla that you'll be looking for chocolate sauce somewhere just to pour on it so you can take it. I mean, I think that's what you're going to, there is no question in my mind. I loved everybody's narrative. It was hilarious. I'm sure you caught it when Channing Tindall gets asked about, how do you feel about the rivalry games in Atlanta? And he immediately started talking about Alabama. Well, we're 0-2 against them. We got to do what it takes to change that. It was like, no. We're talking about the one this week. There, no matter what they do, there's going to be Bama on their mind this week. There's got to be. And I tell you this, Kirby Smart has done a lot of things to help turn this battleship that is Georgia football into the right direction. And probably one of the biggest that we don't talk about all that much is that entire support arm. And, Georgia has more support staffers than I think any other team in the country, possibly with the exception of Alabama. It's hard to keep track of who's hiring whom, but there is a whole wing of the Butts Bear football complex that is just dedicated to nothing but every play Alabama has played for the last 3 years with the personnel that they'll have in this game. I mean, they will have a breakdown on every single part of it. So, everybody will say, all we're thinking about is Georgia Tech. All we're thinking about is Georgia Tech. You better not be all you're thinking about, because they got a whole nother army over there in Tuscaloosa doing the same thing, right? So I'm so fired up about that matchup, number one versus number two. And it's amazing that, here we are going into clean old-fashioned hate week, and it's I wrote it today, it's not really clean old-fashioned hate anymore. It's kind of like clean old-fashioned dislike, slightly annoyed, the slightly annoyed bowl, I mean, it's just not what it used to be. Now, there's many examples. I talked to Coach Dooley earlier today. There's millions of examples of where Tech cropped up on them in a year where they weren't supposed to. 1976, Georgia clinched the SEC championship, and they needed a last-second field goal to win. There's been a bunch of other times like that. 1982, the year that last time Georgia was undefeated. I mean, they won it pretty good, but it wasn't the cakewalk they expected, and they didn't have an SEC championship game the next week. It's sad that Georgia Tech has let this situation get like it has. I mean, I put the onus on them. I understand they have a different, dynamic over there academically and location-wise. But hey, man, it is what it is. And that place has a great football tradition in the middle of as talent-rich of an area as you could possibly have. And as we see from Georgia right now, they're not just signing Atlanta anymore. They're signing Nevada and Washington and California and Florida. They're signing more players from Florida than Florida is. It's there for the taking, but they got to find somebody who can do with it what they have, and they haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, shades of LSU Tulane, Chip. So Florida fires their coach, and now they're going to be hiring. This is amazing. I looked this up today. This will be the 7th Florida head coach since 2001. Kirby is the 2nd Georgia head coach in 2001. Chip, where do you think Florida goes with this? And did they pull the string too fast on Mullen, do you feel?
They might have. I don't know. The majority of my Georgia friends, wanted him to stay forever. There was a funny text thread I found myself on, and they were this was before he got fired on Sunday. They were starting a GoFundMe page to keep Dan Mullen in Gainesville. That's always been a fascinating situation. For years, Coach Dooley used to talk about it. Many coaches since then and up until the 2000s, until Spurrier did what he did, that's just a sleeping giant. But it's been a difficult situation to find the right guy, and I think this is a really important hire for them. I don't know where they're going to go with it. I don't know if you hear crazy things like Bob Stoops coming out of retirement and doing it, and get Spurrier to finish things up, to coming after an assistant that's kicking their butt right now, like Dan Lanning at Georgia, and certainly a lot of other coaches out there. They could possibly go after Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin at Florida. I just can't wrap my mind around that one. That would be really interesting, but I don't know what they're going to do. I really don't. And I'm surprised by the situation they've got him. But this comes back to your original point about where Georgia is. It's just the alignment of the planets is really good right now. You're in a position you should own the East. And, last year I might have been the only one with this megaphone, but I was saying, that was a little bit of a fluke last year. Florida was good. They were really, really good. But gosh, they caught Georgia at a good time. Jordan Davis out, Richard LeCount out, losing Lewis Seen in the middle of the game. It was crazy. George Pickens out, losing Roseby Jack-Sank. Bennett's shoulder gets knocked out of socket on a touchdown play. They're up 14-0 and wasn't the same in that game. That was just crazy how the plants aligned. So I thought Florida overreacted to the whole everything that happened. They go 8-4. They ended up 8-4, and they give him this big rich contract, and they're beating drums all over the place about how Florida's back. And I was kind of like, I don't know about that. I keep looking at these head-to-head recruiting battles, and I don't see you winning many of them. And so what are you doing? Are you just smarter than everybody else about those 3 stars that Georgia overlooked? Or 4 stars in some cases? I don't know. That's tough. It's going to be a tough job. And with everybody else out there hunting for coaching talent, it's going to be really, really competitive as well.
It's going to be real competitive, Chip. And I think Tennessee with Josh Heupel impressed me in 1 year. I'm not saying he can make a gigantic step because I think they really need Hendon Hooker to come back there. He's number 2 in the nation now in passing. The kid is 17-20, and they put 60 on the scoreboard. That style offense, for what it's worth, I don't know if people got to catch up to it or get more depth, maybe. But whatever they're doing, it is working for them. I don't know if I think they're going to be a serious threat to Georgia next year, or maybe not even the year after. But it looks like he's got a system that he can recruit to. And those receivers want to play in that system. And NIL, I guess before I let you go, you and I haven't really talked a lot about it since before the season. We've watched how it's played out some. I had this thought, Chip. Boosters forever and ever gave money to the school for facilities and to sponsor coaches' salaries or AD positions. I guess they do it at Georgia. I think that's one of the most curious things I've ever seen. They have a AD position named after a donor. How far away are we from boosters just giving money to pay players? Just start an above board fund like I saw Ole Miss. If you're academically eligible at Ole Miss, they got a $4 million fund that paid everybody like $6,000. Just flat out pay them. off a boot. And if you're a booster, rather than give $1 million, why not just give Nakobe Dean $1 million to come back for another year?
Yeah.
And ask him to do a endorsement for you on his Twitter or something.
I mean, you don't think that's going on already? I mean, I do. I mean, NIL's been interesting. I started to say fascinating, but it hasn't been as fascinating as I expected it to be, right? I thought the coolest thing was the Kansas kid who's caught the 2-point conversion, to beat Texas. I love those stories. I think that's great. Hey man, go pump some Applebee's.
What about the Kentucky basketball freshman getting a Porsche chip? That isn't fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating, but that's the one that's icky to me. That's icky to me, and that's there's a large ick factor in here, and I'm old school from that standpoint of I mean, I always kind of rolled my eyes at amateurism, period, but especially since it became such a money-oriented sport with the network contracts and stuff. But yeah, they've got to get a handle on this, and I don't know if they can. I mean, it's the toothpaste out of the tube now, and guys like Jordan Davis. I mean, I wish they were more transparent about it. I wish we could get transparency at this, and you're never going to get it. But I would just love to know, what all is Jordan Davis, what all has he made money from this year? You just driving through Atlanta, and all of a sudden you see a billboard and there's, hey, there's Jordan Davis up there. I wonder what he got for that. I don't know. It's problematic and it's complicated, and the NCAA clearly is not going to be the answer. So it's going to have to be self-policed. And, can you imagine these guys self-policing each other? I mean, it's crazy. It's difficult.
It is difficult, Chip. Listen, I know we got to let you go, folks. I got to tell you, I always tell Chip I'm going to have him on for 15 or 20 minutes, and I keep him twice as long. And I need to let him go, or I won't be.
Gosh, I see up there how long we've been on. Wow.
Well, it kind of goes. You and I get to talk, and it kind of goes fast, Chip. We've obviously, in the way we talk on the show, just so people know, it's just like we do whenever we're in the press box or traveling anywhere together. So I want to thank Chip for coming on now and appreciate it, Chip. I want to take a break now, and certainly everyone watching knows exactly, why we take this moment to give appreciation to our sponsor, Ingles. It wasn't so long ago, there was a lot of uncertainty, still some, but boy, I'll tell you what, we were all in dire straits. And one thing we could count on was knowing that our local Ingles was going to come through with those products and have those frontline workers for us to get us through those tough times. And I want to take a moment now to appreciate our sponsor, Ingles, tonight.
It's in our hearts to feel for you. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. But we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back, with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Boy, I love it. Jermaine King just nailed it there. Community strong. He said it before they even sang the lyric. And Jacob O'Neill, Hugh Nash, John McGraw, you recognizing the sponsor in that way, that's big, right? Ingles, needs to know that the Dog Nation has the support and appreciation. So I appreciate that from all of you. I want to run a theory by you, because I'll say things from time to time and it'll get repeated in a dozen different ways. I'm not against Georgia playing Georgia Tech. I want to be clear on this, but there's a concept that I've brought or thought or at least witnessed since I've been covering Georgia. And what I've seen with Kirby Smart, remember, I'm coming in off the street fresh after 4 years. I've always seen Georgia from the Auburn point of view, or the Alabama or the Tennessee or the Michigan State. I've been strong for the Honolulu Advertiser when Hawaii played Georgia. So I've seen Georgia from several ways, outside in, but now seeing it from inside out. I'm fascinated to see a program that's on the cusp of a potential football dynasty. I don't know if they'll do it. I don't know if they can sustain, but Kirby's got them above the pack right now. I just posted a story on Dog Nation tonight about where Kirby Smart has this program. And Kirby didn't get there by doing everything the same way. There's a lot of things behind the scenes in Butts-Mehre that are being handled differently. And they're being run in a way that leads to championships. So I guess what I'm saying here is Georgia scheduling in a championship manner? I'm going to leave Jacksonville out of the discussion tonight. We've talked about it on the show. You've talked about it. But as far as Georgia Tech goes, now that you're adding more of these home and homes with the Oklahomas of the world, the UCLAs of the world, this is one more non-conference game every other year that you're not playing in Sanford Stadium when you add these sort of elite Power 5 conference schools. And I'm just not sure that playing a home and home with Georgia Tech advances the ball on championship football. I don't know if that's part of the formula. I don't know if it helps you. When the Georgia Tech game was set up to be last in the season, there wasn't a conference championship game. And I feel like rivalries meant more before the playoff format came in, because it used to be at the end of the year, 2 teams or maybe 4 might be in contention for a national championship, and the bowl selection committee at the Sugar, the Rose, the Orange, they would cut these early deals to get these teams set up. And then we would see who would win the bowls, and then we'd all vote, right? But it wasn't as clear cut as now, where there's these playoff games. Quick sidebar. I was talking to the late Lavelle Edwards 5 or 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember. I was doing a story with him, and I asked Lavelle Edwards about playing Michigan in the 1984 Holiday Bowl. And I don't know how many people remember that scenario, the year that BYU won the national championship. And I was always curious, and I was always mad at BYU because I thought, oh, look, they stayed and hid in the Holiday Bowl rather than going to the Sugar Bowl and playing a 1-loss team, or the Orange Bowl, And so I asked Lavelle Edwards, why did you guys play a 1-loss team? Why did you play, I think they played a 4-loss Michigan in the Holiday Bowl. I said, why didn't you go play one of those teams? He said, they wouldn't let us. I said, what? He said, we called and guaranteed tickets to the Sugar Bowl, and they wouldn't let us play in the game. They had their 2 teams, and they didn't want undefeated BYU. And they tried to get in the Orange Bowl, and they didn't want them either. And y'all already know that the Rose Bowl wasn't letting anybody but the Big Ten and the Pac-10 in prior to Roy Kramer and the BCS. So BYU didn't have a choice. They weren't given an opportunity. So they played in the Holiday Bowl, and the best team they could get was like a 4-loss Michigan, and they beat them, and they won the national title. That's how things used to be, all right? Playing Georgia Tech, Clemson playing South Carolina, Florida playing Florida State, no longer makes sense to do that at the end of the season. These are games that, if they're going to continue to be played, need to be played at the beginning of the year, because the end of the season is when we're chopping it up and figuring out conference champions. Georgia needs to play Florida that last week, or Georgia needs to play South Carolina, in my opinion, and play those rivals, those non-conference rivals, almost like a preseason, a little bit like we saw with Georgia Clemson. One of the fun things and cool things about Georgia Clemson this year, to me, was that it didn't matter if either team lost, they could still win a national title. Now, Georgia Tech isn't of that stature. That's another part of the problem. It's nothing to gain and everything to lose. And playing in their stadium is nothing to gain. You are 70 miles from Atlanta already. You're playing in Atlanta the next week. It's not like you're not getting exposure in Atlanta. Maybe there was a time before every game was on TV, but that's not it anymore. And you heard me reference the LSU Tulane. And that rivalry kind of went by the wayside. Why? Because LSU didn't need to play Tulane anymore. It didn't do any good for them. I'm sure the people in New Orleans missed it. Maybe even some people out in Louisiana. But nobody else in the country did. When Georgia didn't play Georgia Tech in football last year, I don't know anybody that really missed that game. When we talk about it this year, we're talking about it like it's some glorified scrimmage. Well, which players is Kirby going to want to play? What does he want to work on? I think that's sad. If you played at the beginning of the year, at least it's both teams are 0-0, and maybe, who knows, maybe, Georgia Tech's good. But right now, after losing 55-0, that's embarrassing for Georgia Tech, and it doesn't really benefit Georgia. My thought, and I'm with Chip, that playing teams like Charleston Southern and Georgia Tech enables you to rest a few guys, but something else happens, and Kirby's talked about this. He's talked about wanting to maintain the rhythm. And he said when you play an FCS team, it's hard to maintain that focus in practice. And he talked about that last week. Now he's saying this week's going to be different. But is it? Chip told you that anecdote about Channing Tindall today being asked about the rivalry in Atlanta, and he thinks they're talking about Alabama the next week. I don't know that the Georgia Tech thing, I don't know if it really resonates with these players. I don't know that. Some of them, yes, but they're all rivalries. South Carolina thinks they're a Georgia rival. Tennessee thinks they're a Georgia rival. Auburn thinks they're a Georgia rival. Florida thinks, half your darn schedule, and Kirby talked about that too. Like, you can't keep going. It's a big rivalry, guys. It's a big rivalry, guys. It's not how it works. So I just want to be clear that I would be fine with Georgia playing Georgia Tech, but under two provisions. One, I think you need to play the game at the beginning of the year. And two, I don't think it should be home and home anymore. I think that the home games at Sanford Stadium are too valuable to just give away. And playing at Georgia Tech and Bobby Dodd Stadium, I just don't see it. What would I do? I would do a rotation of in-state games in Sanford Stadium every year. First or second game. 1 year it's Tech, 1 year it's Georgia State, 1 year it's Savannah State, and 1 year it's Georgia Southern. Because I just don't see the value of playing Georgia Tech. Remember, it didn't help you get into the playoff. People, it's a Power 5 school. In title only. No one looks at that game and goes, oh, let's give Georgia credit for beating Georgia Tech. Nobody in the college football committee is doing that, okay? Nobody cares. So that's my thought on that. I wanted to be clear on that. I wanted to explain why I think that the Georgia Tech home and home at the end of the year has kind of jumped the shark. And the bottom line is, I think Georgia needs to schedule more in line for championships. And sometimes you can't worship at the ashes of tradition. Things change. There's a lot of things that used to be traditions, that are no longer, because we evolve and because circumstances change. Now that there's this SEC championship game at the end of the year, now that there's a college football playoff, I think you need to make decisions accordingly that give you the best opportunity to maximize your team's situation at the end of the year. So that's kind of my thought on that. I'm looking forward to a weekend full of games. Alabama-Auburn, to me, is always fascinating. I think that's a fantastic rivalry. I think that's the best college football rivalry that's going. I know Michigan's going to play Ohio State in a game that, certainly there's a lot more on the line. The winner probably in the playoff, the loser probably out. That said, the winner of that game still got to beat the West team, I believe Wisconsin or Iowa. Wisconsin's playing good football right now. But to me, Ohio State, I jumped Ohio State over Alabama to number 2 in my pool because I was that impressed with Ohio State. I knew they'd beat Michigan State. Michigan State's doing it with mirrors. Michigan State does not have top 10 or probably top 20 talent. But Mel Tucker is one heck of a coach, and those Spartans were bought in. And when they beat Michigan, they got a big boost off of it. They're probably going to lose to Penn State again this weekend also, by the way, because they really just don't have that much talent. But this Michigan-Ohio State game's big. But, boy, Alabama-Auburn, anything can happen in that game and has, right? Do you realize that Alabama has not won at Auburn since 2015? Is that amazing, right? Alabama has won 3 national championships since the last time they won a game in Auburn. So keep that in mind this weekend. The Tide is dynamic with the receivers. We talked about that. Georgia run game is going to have to really be effective and punish to set up the play action. I just don't know if Georgia wins a shootout with the current offense. Certainly Kirby's not planning to get in a shootout. And there's not a guarantee that Bryce Young is going to be able to put points on the board like he has all year. He's mobile, he's fast, but he's never seen a pass rush like this. Even though Georgia's right now, Nolan Smith with the elbow and Adam Anderson out, Channing Tindall's still there. Trayvon Walker is still there. Devontae Wyatt is still there. There's still a lot of great front 7 players. The back, we talked about the concern about Christopher Smith. Boy, keep your eye peeled. Keep your ear to the ground. I think he's a very important player in that secondary. So we'll look forward to monitoring that for you. A lot of good content up. Before we go, I wanted to go over my stock report with you. I know this is something that a lot of you seem to enjoy when we talk about the players whose stock is up and the players whose stock is down. I think Brock Bowers is, to me, a gold chip stock. He's been unbelievable. He's had incredible impact. He's already set the record for catches in one season by a tight end, touchdown catches. He is on the brink of breaking Orson Charles' receiving yardage on the season. He's 25 yards away for the single season record for receiving yardage. We could be witnessing the greatest tight end in Georgia football history in Brock Bowers. Jordan Davis, another one, stock way up. Quite a senior day for Jordan. A lot of attention in the limelight. Continues to play well. He's a finalist for the Nagurski, which goes to the best defensive player in the country. It's based in Charlotte, North Carolina. That'd be a really nice award for Jordan to win. I think Alabama's Will Anderson and that Oregon defensive end are the 2 other finalists. And then he was a semifinalist for the Outland Trophy, the only defensive player among the 6, and that goes to the best lineman on offense or defense. So an honor just to be a semifinalist. James Cook, to me, I'm at a point with Cook where I want to see him get 20 touches a game. He's really come on the second half of the year. I think he's your most dynamic runner right now and most versatile. And Broderick Jones, and I know Kirby likes to call out these freshmen, I don't see anybody coming in from that left side. I think he's done a bang-up job. And when Jamari comes back, I'll be curious to see where Jamari comes back. Does he come back at tackle? Does he come back at guard? Those will stock up. We mentioned Channing Tindall, another sack last week. Ladd McConkey, boy, I think we're going to say this name a lot the next 3 years. I see Ladd being a team captain. I think he's your Hunter Renfrow. 2 catches for 24 yards, and his punt returns 34 and 28 blew me away. Jake Camarda, we just don't give this guy enough love and credit. He's having an unbelievable year, flips the field, puts the other team's offenses in a bad spot. Jake Camarda will be sorely missed after this year. I said stock even on the quarterback efficiency. This was collectively, but 20 of 37 with 2 interceptions against an FCS team didn't really do much for me. And granted, it wasn't set up to, I suppose, if you're going to play 4 quarterbacks, it's going to be hard to get in any kind of rhythm. But still, I thought Charleston Southern was a pretty awful team. And I was a little disappointed. It was only 7-7 the whole second half. I would have thought that Georgia's 2s and 3s would have been able to outscore. But that's just me. So that was the stock even. So, that's that. And again, we do these analysis and good and bad, try to provide you with that equilibrium and that feedback. I do a lot of interviews. I think I've told you guys my itinerary before. Monday mornings at 8 o'clock, I'm on 92.9 in Atlanta. 8:40, I'm on at Athens, the Ref. 2:15, I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. Of course, we have this show tomorrow morning at 8:20. I'll be in Nashville's WNSR. I'll do Birmingham's WJOX tomorrow at 12:30. Wednesday, I'll do BA's Dog Nation Daily right here. And then Thursday, I do a Sirius XM radio show on the SEC Network, 8:30 a.m. Oftentimes on Feinbaum Thursday. This week, I'll be on Friday on set 4:15 from Auburn. And I give a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts. And I try to provide context, but I don't always do a good job of that. And certainly I could do a better job with providing context when I give my snappy answers. But just like Twitter, if you just hear it, you don't hear the question, you don't hear the context, it can be hard to follow. So I encourage all of you to follow me on Twitter at Mike Griffith 32. Send me emails, send me direct messages. I'm glad to give you guys feedback. If you've got a question, I'll be more than happy to answer it. You guys know I'm going to shoot straight. I'm going to try to tell it like it is. Probably could use a little bit more tact from time to time. But, as my buddy said, if you did that, then you wouldn't be Mike. So Mike is Mike. It's Monday night. I've enjoyed the show tonight. I loved having Chip on, longtime writer, great historian, good friend. I'm glad that you all enjoyed him. I appreciated the kind comments. While Chip was on, he didn't say it, but I know he appreciated it. So that was really cool that you guys treated Chip well. And I think he gave you his best tonight too. And he went double the time that he said he would. So I appreciated that as well. So all in all, just a great Monday. I'm going to go turn on the rest of this Georgia basketball game. The Dogs are in a dogfight with Virginia. Tony Bennett, they're down 47-46 in the Legends Classic. Tom Crean, he's thrown these 10 guys together, and they fought against Tech. They weren't going to beat Tech. Tech had too many guys coming back. But tonight, Crean's got these guys balling and playing hard. I don't know if they can keep it together. There's 10 new guys. It's going to take a minute to play well, but you can tell he's solved that pack defense that Virginia played. Crean's always solves it, but the guys just got to make shots. He just got to get some players, man, and we'll see if they can do it tonight. But everybody, tomorrow night, Connor in coverage. Wednesday night, Centel. No cover 4 this week, but check us out Saturday. Check me out Friday at 4:15 on SEC Network. And if you got any questions, hit me up. Give me that Twitter follow at Mike Griffith 32. Have a wonderful Monday night, everybody.